All right, it's the boy Blackbeard Mirage. I'm back. The Silent Assassin. Salute. Just want to welcome all the new viewers, all the new subscribers, and the old ones as well. Very, very thankful to have y'all in the house. You know, very, very thankful. Very, very thankful. What we're going to do in this tape is talk about some more, of course, American history, because I want to expand the conscience and understanding of the indigenous Illuminati, or also known as the North American Negus, so we can have a better grasp and better grip on, you know, who it is that we really are and be secure in who we are. All right. So we're going to, you know, kind of shout out the ancestors on this one and dedicate this one to them. All right. So what we're going to do is look at a variety of things, basically look at the different, you know, Aboriginal peoples who were on the North American continent, because you got to remember that as so-called black people or so-called African Americans, a lot of us look very, very different. You know, although we may have the different copper color skin tones, you know, some of us may have the lighter, you know, hues, and we have different hair textures and stuff like that, different heights and sizes, but nevertheless, we still are all indigenous Aboriginal people. So in order for us to understand, you know, why we all look so different like that, yet we all still the same people, it's because we are the sons and daughters of everybody from the old world. Let me repeat. The so-called black people or so-called African Americans are the sons and daughters of everybody from the old world. So that means that all the copper colored indigenous people of the old world, we have those people's blood inside of us. We are the composite of all those people. So we really are somewhat of a mixed people. And although when we see each other, we look as, you know, pure blooded so-called black people, but we really are a mixture of all the old ancient, you know, indigenous Autochthon people. All right. So we're going to look into, you know, just some of the stuff that's going on the American soils in the old world as it pertains to some of the copper mining in Michigan. We're going to look into that. We're going to look into some of the indigenous tribes of so-called Georgia. All right. And look at how the Minoans are, you know, the father and mother, you know, peoples of a lot of the indigenous tribes in Western Georgia and in Alabama. OK, so we're going to look into them. Because a lot of us, when we look up the Minoans, we see their influence in the Mediterranean Sea, and we see their influence in what we call ancient Greece. But we got to remember that indigenous peoples and these phenotypes, you know, have been on all continents, and we have been also traveling by the waters because we are the mariners. OK, that's another word for, you know, the Moor is also a navigator or a mariner. So we were traveling the waters, you know, trading resources that came from different natural lands. So we would take the things that we would, you know, get from the lands of America and travel across the Atlantic and trade them with, you know, the family over there and stuff, and vice versa. So in America, and the example I'm going to use is how we did the copper mining in Michigan. But basically what it was is we would, you know, use the natural resources here, and we would go across the water, you know, trade them with other people, and then set up little civilizations or little cities, you know, across the Atlantic or across the Pacific or all these other places. And then some of us would stay in those places. So when I talk about the Minoans, when we see this influence of the Minoans in Georgia, I don't want you all to think that the majority of the Minoans possibly may have been in Greece and then a few of them came to Georgia. It could have been that, or it could have been reversed. How do we know that the majority of the indigenous Minoan people, you know, that we know later day were in Greece? How do we know that they didn't come from America initially? All right. So that's what we're going to look into. We'll also look into how the elephants or the Mastodons are also known as the mammoths, how they had an effect and a presence here in the Americas, because there was a time where the Americas had different types of animals and the climate was different as well. OK, so the way that America is today, it wasn't always like this. You know, the rivers were different. The lakes were different. Like I said, the temperatures were different. The climates were different. For example, North America was a little more tropical like at one point in time. I've been doing research and seeing that there were even parrots at one point in time throughout North America, because sometimes when you look at indigenous pictures, you will see the Autochthon people with parrots with them, or they may have something that's made out of the little parrot feathers and stuff like that. So don't always think that the parrots were in Central and South America. They were in North America too. But it's just as the climate changes, a lot of these animals started to migrate and move into Central America and move into South America. OK, for example, the black jaguar, or what we may know of as the Black Panther, that animal also is indigenous to the Americas, in particular, North America. And you will find that in some research as well. So that's why that movie had a real profound effect with us here in North America, because the black jaguar, also known as the Black Panther, he's he's indigenous to the Americas. All right. So we're going to look at just a variety of those things. We're going to look at a variety of them. So before I go into, the more majority of the reading, what I want you to understand, when we say the indigenous people of America, we're talking about, of course, the tribes, but these tribes come from greater families or greater populations or greater nations or greater empires of peoples. So although you may have, let's say, the Chickasaw, the Wichita, the Muskogee, the Oconee, you may have these different tribes, but please believe that all these tribes came from one major group or one major family. Okay. So don't get the names mixed up. These names are just different little, like I said, they're just tribal identifiers. But as far as the ethnicity and whatever empire these people came from, it was the exact same. All right. So when we say all these so-called Native American tribes, in the modern world, you all would call them Negro, because in a lot of literature that I read and a lot of research I see, they connect a lot of the indigenous American so-called tribes and peoples to the quote unquote Negro race. So when we talk about, once again, the indigenous, let's say Yamasee, these are quote unquote Negro people. All right. Now, of course, Negro is not the right word. It would be indigenous, but I just want you all to get the phenotype of your mindset. Also, if they say Moor or Meru, that's no different than really even saying Negro. You're just trying to point out the identifying phenotype of the person. Now, some of these ancient cultures here were the Hopwell mound building culture. OK, you had the Adena culture, the Mississippian, of course, an archaic. So let's go through somewhat of a timeline. So we had the late archaic, also known as the Adena cultures as well, which ranged from about 3000 BC to about 1500 BC. And then they'll date the Adena culture sometime from 1500 BC to 300 AD. Now, like I said, we are a super ancient primordial people. So these cultures that we're talking about are just something that's a little more, in a modern sense, so we could somewhat materialize where we are in history. All right. So you got the late archaic period here in the old Americas. You have the Adena culture in old America. Like, for example, when we got the different serpent mounds and the serpent walls across the Americas, these are, built by the people that they call the Olmecs. OK, and these were, once again, the original Typhonian peoples, or some of the original Typhonian peoples of the indigenous Americas. And they were a so-called Negro race. So not all Olmecs look like the Olmec head statues. You see, just like all so-called black people or all so-called African Americans don't look alike, but they all come from the same nation or the same empire. It's the same with the Olmec. So we don't want to think in our head that the only phenotype for the Olmec is that one we see on the head. Now, we know that that is the primary or the dominant phenotype. OK, but we don't want to just think that all the people look like that. All right. Then we also have the Hopwell culture, and we have the Mississippian culture as well. So as far as the Adena, the Hopwell, the Mississippian, these are just some of the ancient civilizations in the Americas. All right. And these are the mound building people. OK, the mound building people, also known as the pyramid building people. OK, the pyramid or the mound building people. All right. And primarily these cultures are in the Midwest, the East, the Southeast, the South. And, so in other words, it's the whole. If you would take the so-called United States or the North American continent, that's excluding Canada. If you cut it right in half at in the Midwest, the entire eastern part of it would be these cultures that I'm talking about, the Adena, the Hopwell, and the Mississippian. Now, of course, we know through research that they have a lot of giants found in the Midwest. OK, so a lot of our ancestors that built these, great mounds, they were giants, believe it or not. All right. Now, speaking of the giant, one thing that was very, very powerful in Blackbeard's childhood was, a TV show I used to watch called Power Rangers. And every time I got home from school, it was very, very critical for me to go watch Power Rangers. And it was simply because I could identify and relate with the Black Ranger. Blackbeard, grew up in the 90s. So all, salute to the brothers and sisters that grew up in the 90s that know about Power Rangers. And the Black Ranger was, he was like, the kids in the 90s. He was very, very hip. You know what I'm saying? He had the sunglasses on, basically like he was fly, you know, and that's how I was as a kid. So, you know, but of course he was older in the cartoon. I mean, not the cartoon, but the TV show. So, you know, he was just like a cool kid to me. And then he had the powers, you know what I'm saying, as the Black Ranger. But one thing that was very, very powerful is that the warrior energy or the warrior frequency that the Black Ranger had was the Mastodon. Okay. Now, this all makes sense because, you know, as I got older and just did my own research and now even understanding the connection between the mastodons or the ancient elephants or the mammoths here in America, I understand why now they made the Black Ranger be associated with the mastodon, because here in America, a lot of our ancestors used the mastodons to help them in a lot of their labor, such as building these great mounds, etc. So it all makes sense why I was so connected to that as a kid and why the writers made the Black Ranger be associated with the mastodon, because that was an animal that was very, very sacred to us here in America. So when they talk about Hannibal and his usage of the elephants and stuff like that going to war, a lot of that was right here in America, you know. So we were using animals like the elephants right here in America as well. So you don't see them today, but they were here, just like there were tigers at one point in America. All right. Now, for all my people that don't know who the Black Ranger is, because some of y'all may be older than me, just real quick, you know, that's just a little picture of the Black Ranger. You know what I'm saying, from the show Power Rangers. But, you know, notice he's an Aboriginal, Indigenous, copper-colored American. And as you can see, they gave him the ancestral power of the Mastodon, which is one of the, you know, animals that his ancestors were using here in America. So right now what I'm going to do is read a little bit about the mystery of the Mastodon pipes in America. And it's coming off of scienceblogs.com/the mystery of the elephant pipes. This was posted by Brian Switek on February the 16th, 2009. And it's titled The Mystery of the Mastodon Pipes. While planting corn on his Iowa farm around 1872, a farmer named Peter Meru found a curious carving. It was a smoking pipe in the shape of an elephant, a very odd item indeed, and he used it for its intended purpose until he moved to Kansas in 1878. At that time, he gave it to his brother-in-law, but soon after, a Reverend Gas came calling. Gas, an amateur archaeologist, wanted to purchase it, but the pipe was not for sale. Even so, the owner of the pipe allowed Gas to photograph it and make some casts, which he shared with the members of the Davenport Academy of Sciences. So what we have is that in 1872, there was a farmer by the name of Peter Meru in the location of Iowa, which is in North America. And while he was out farming, you know, and plowing the ground, he came across this smoking pipe that he found in the soil or deep in the earth that was in the shape of an elephant. So you have this, you know, this planter who was planting corn in Iowa in 1872. And when he was digging up the earth, he came across a smoking pipe that was in the shape of an elephant. All right. So moving on. I'm going to read now. I'm going to read the next part, excuse me. From what is known of Meru's property and the general area, it seemed likely that the pipe had been scattered from a burial mound. These human-made hills of earth contained bones and artifacts and were the objects of great archaeological interest. But why would the mound builders, who lived before the presently known tribes of Native Americans, have made a pipe in the shape of an elephant? As reported by R.J. Farquharson in an 1879 issue of the American Antiquarian, the pipe may have signified that the artisan who made it had seen mastodons plodding around or plodding across the landscape, although just how long ago was hard to tell. Some thought that mastodons were present in America right up to the time of European colonialization, and as the article in the Popular Science Monthly concluded. So what I'm going to do is read this last part in this article, but I want to just go through real quick how it says that this mastodon pipe or elephant pipe may have been scattered from a burial mound. So a lot of these mounds that we see that our ancestors built here in America, they was actually burial mounds. And they were constructed the same way that the Egyptian tombs were. So they had chambers, and they would have like multiple levels of chambers. Okay. And you would almost use like a ladder to climb down the center of the mound and then, just go through the different chambers. So if you research a lot of these mounds that they found across America, they actually were pyramids or mountains. So when you will read into the Old Testament and it would talk about Mount Moriah or Mount Zion, a lot of the times they're talking about these pyramid and these temples, because the mounds are the temples, believe it or not. And the mounds are the pyramids. Okay. But it said that that the mound builders were here before the Native Americans. So all these Native American tribes, at least a lot of these amalgamated ones, they say that they didn't build these mounds. Okay. They didn't build the mounds. So let's wrap it up with this last part. It says that some thought that the Mastodons were present in America right up to the time of European colonialization. So once again, there were elephants and mastodons in North America. Okay, and our ancestors were using them in this land. All right. So when they talk about the saber-toothed tiger and the titanoboa, the ancient alligator, you know what I'm saying, and these different typhonic draconian creatures, our ancestors were living amongst them. Okay. So it says that in a Popular Science Monthly, it concluded, constantly objects are being brought to the attention of archaeologists are having some bearing upon this question of the contemporary of man and mastodon in North America as to whether the elephant pipes of Ohio or the Lenape stone of Pennsylvania being genuine or not. No opinion is expressed, but it is unquestionable that many of the remains of the mastodons found in New Jersey and New York are far more present than some of the relics of man, and it seems impossible that even so late a corner of as the Indian should not have seen living mastodons on the Atlantic seaboard of this continent. Elephant pipes and carvings should not be condemned merely because of an impression still prevalent that the mastodon was a creature of an earlier geographical epoch than the recent. This is but half the truth. He also shared the forests of the present with the fauna of historic times. So basically what it's just saying here is that, these elephant pipes shouldn't really be discounted, and that, more than likely these elephants were in a different time of North America or a different epoch. Because like I said, it was different climates here. You know what I'm saying? Different temperatures. It wasn't always the same. And I'm going to show you all a picture of the elephant pipe real quick. So right here is a picture of the elephant pipe that they found in Iowa. Okay. And I think it was 1872. I can't remember off the top of my head. But this is a picture of the elephant pipe that they found. All right. So once again, why are they finding elephant pipes in Iowa? Because it said more than likely whoever made this either was living with them, or knew about them from an ancient time. But once again, this is in Iowa, people, not Africa. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to read a little bit about the Michigan copper mining. I've talked about this on a previous tape, but what it is like I said, a lot of our indigenous American ancestors, they took their resources that they had here and they went across the Atlantic and set up shop over there. So a lot of these civilizations that started in so-called North Africa, East Africa, Southern Europe, Central Europe, the Mediterranean, you know what I'm saying, the so-called Greek culture and all that. A lot of that was created from the people of Atlantis. And the people of Atlantis, of course, some of them did leave those islands and the massive continent that's under the water right now. But some of them also came from North America. All right. So like I said, the Minoans are, some of these people. And what we'll see here is that up in Michigan, there was mining that went down up there. And the mining was for copper. So when they call you all the copper colored people, or say that the original American from 1828 Webster's Dictionary is a copper colored person, not only is it a person who has the phenotype of and the appearance and the shine of the color copper, but it is also a person who was mining copper and dealing with copper in that sense from the earth. Because you can't say you are an indigenous or an autochthon or an aboriginal, which basically is just somebody who springs from the grounds of the earth, just like Adam in the Hebrew. Don't Adam mean red? Isn't the clay of Georgia red? Isn't our skin tone and the copper a bronze colored reddish color? All right. Don't they call the Washington Redskins the Redskins? And isn't it a maroon colored or a copper colored, dark bronze colored man as they mascot? So let's dig a little deep into the copper people. This is coming from minethehive.com / the ancient copper mines of Michigan. All right. A major head scratcher when it comes to this ancient mining operation is that the number of copper tools found in the region in North America as a whole is not even remotely consistent with the amount of copper that was pulled from just this region in Michigan. You could take all the copper tools that have been discovered in all of North America, and you're still not even remotely close to the low estimates of what was taken from this area in Michigan. Copper was simply an uncommon material amongst the Native Americans. So already they're telling you in this article is that the Native Americans didn't really use copper like that. So they want to know, where did all this copper go that was dug up out of Michigan? And I'm here to tell you that our ancestors was trading it across the Atlantic. Anyway, moving on, it says that interestingly, an enormous boom of copper swept through ancient Europe at almost the same exact time when the beginning of the mining in Michigan began, as detailed by the British Museum on a placard in the Bronze Age exhibit. From about 2500 BC, the use of copper, formerly limited to the parts of southern Europe, suddenly swept through the rest of the continent. The bulk of Michigan mining is thought to have begun around 2450 BC. So they're saying that in 2450 BC, that a lot of this mining in Michigan for copper started to begin. Then it says around 2500 BC, so once again, you're talking about a 50-year difference, that there is this explosion in this usage of copper in southern and central Europe. Now, let me ask you a question. Who was in southern and central Europe? And who is responsible for all the old kingdoms and old empires and old dominions of southern and central Europe? That would be these people that we know of as quote unquote Moors. Now, who is in indigenous Aboriginal America around this same time? Okay. Of course, you got the indigenous Autochthon of the soils of America. So if you have copper mining going on in 2450 BC in Michigan, which is in North America, and then all of a sudden you having this explosion of copper showing up in southern Europe and central Europe, which is across the Atlantic, that means that more than likely a lot of this copper was going over there. And they weren't just giving it to those people. They were more than likely trading with those people. So this is what we mean when we talk about, when some of you hear some of the brothers, talk about the Moorish Empire on an international scale. What they mean is that all the indigenous kingdoms and whatever the continental national empire was, it was connected to more of a global empire of people. Like, people weren't isolated like that. So the indigenous Americans weren't just these isolated people among themselves. They were included, in the activities that was going on in the entire earth at that time. They weren't just on this rock by themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, they say Turtle Island is North America, but if you look at a lot of the ancient Mayan pictures, Turtle Island is the entire earth. So let me, put that in y'all's mind. Turtle Island is the entire earth. All right. So before we move on, we just want to show that a lot of this copper mining began in 2450 BC in North America, in Michigan. And they saying that in ancient Europe, there was an enormous boom of copper that was around 2500 BC. All right. So once again, it's showing you that the Moors of southern Europe at 2450 BC, 2500 BC, was trading and dealing with the indigenous Autochthons of America at the same time period, traveling across the Atlantic, dealing with each other, going back and forth. And like I said, the world was entirely different at that time. So it may have not taken that long for you to travel from southern Europe or central Europe to Michigan. It may have not taken that long. All right. So I'm going to read a little bit more. All right. It's truly difficult to imagine how a civilization could have worked so consistently at such a gargantuan scale of the incredible period of time. And again, this is a low estimate. Other researchers would suggest that 3 times as much copper was removed. Though to note, other estimates have also been given for how long the mines were in use, suggesting they were first visited at a much earlier time. Yet what makes this feat simply mind-blowing for any experts is how advanced the operation was. So what we had going on in Michigan, like I said, in the 3000 BCs, 2500 BCs, it was a major copper mining system going on. And a lot of our indigenous ancestors was dealing with the copper. Let's look at a picture real quick. So here's a picture right now, basically of the northern part of so-called, Michigan, around the Great Lakes. And as you can see, this is basically, the copper mine right here. It's miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles long of copper. And they literally was digging into the earth. So you got to remember now, since this is where the copper is, these people were digging into the earth to deal with it. You see these little streams right here. These are rivers, okay, that are coming from Lake Superior, of course, but these are the rivers. And you notice how our veins look a lot like these rivers. So once again, Aboriginal or Autochthon people, our bodies, that's why they say that the Kabbalah is a manifestation of Malkuth, or your physical body is a manifestation of the earth itself, because it's made the same. So just think about it, how our veins look like these rivers. But anyway, these rivers are leading to the copper mines. And this is where our ancestors was dealing. So they was around the Great Lakes, you know what I'm saying, around these regions. And also a lot of our ancestors was polluting the lakes from their copper mines as well. So that karmic energy, showed up again with that whole Flint, Michigan poisoning of the water, because a lot of our ancestors was doing that with their copper mine and stuff. So yeah, the Pale Tamahu Neanderthal did it. You know what I'm saying? I'm not discounting that. But a lot of stuff that he does to us is because of karmic debt that we got to pay because of what our ancestors did to ourselves. You see? But these are the copper mines right here in Michigan. All right. So salute to all my niggas in Negus in Michigan. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to read about the Minoans. Because like I said, a lot of the indigenous Americans, whether you call yourself a Yamasee, an Iroquois, a Anasazi, you know what I'm saying, a Pueblo, a Mississippian, you know what I'm saying, any of that stuff, no matter what tribe you call yourself, like I said, the indigenous Aboriginal people, the natural original people of this planet today, they sons and daughters of North America are the total of all the ancient peoples. So although we look like original indigenous people, we still are a mixture. So once again, let's take Blackbeard's, you know what I'm saying, wrist. Now, as you can see, Blackbeard's wrist is the same copper color as his bracelet. And although you look at my arm, you see that, I'm the color as a so-called black person or a so-called African American. But I am a mixture of all the indigenous people, you see? So we really are a mixed people, okay? And one of those people that we, represent are the Minoans, okay? The Minoans. And we have evidence that is showing up in Georgia around Fort Benning. And I've talked about it before, but we're going deeper in it right now. This is coming from wordpress.com/mystery of the Metcalf stone. So if you want to know what is this whole Minoan thing in Fort Benning, it's called the Metcalf stone, Metcalf stone. In the 1960s, Manfred Metcalf was gathering stones for a barbecue. On a 5-pound, 1-foot square rock, he found an engraved sunburst and other symbols. The stone was examined by Dr. Joseph Mahan, an expert on the Yuki Indians. And this was found in Weir, Georgia by Jim Miles, published in April of 2006. Okay, moving on. Excavations made at Fort Benning, Georgia 4 years ago uncovered an inscribed stone which some ethnologists believe links the Yuki Indian tribe to a 3,500-year-old Minoan civilization in the Mediterranean, reported UPI. This stone was, in other words, the Metcalf stone. So they saying that this Metcalf stone that they found in Fort Benning, Georgia, connects the Yuki indigenous tribe to the 3,500-year-old Minoan civilization of the Mediterranean. So like I said, you have in Georgia and Alabama, the Yuki tribe or the indigenous Yuki, okay? Once again, in the areas of Far East Alabama or in the western part of Georgia, okay? I want to show you all a picture real quick before we go deeper. So the geographic region right now that we talking about is over here. We talking about this region right over here now. We talking about Fort Benning and the Minoan civilization. We talking about right over here. Once again, this is where Blackbeard's indigenous ancestors come from. Now, I also want you to note too that this is on the border, of course, because Alabama will be over here. But notice this concentration of mounds right here. You see this concentration of mounds? And also they have Fort Benning in these same areas. So everywhere that they build a military base, there's something popping in that area. So I just want you to remember, look at this concentration of mounds right here in West Georgia. So if y'all want some homework assignment, y'all could look into this mound concentration right here in West Georgia. All right. So I'm going to reread this one more time. It says that Manfred Metcalf in 1966, a Fort Benning civilian employee, had been gathering stones to build a barbecue pit. One of the stones seemed unusual to Metcalf, so he gave it to Joseph Mahan Jr., director of the Columbus, Georgia Museum of Arts and Crafts Department. So what happened is that you had a man named Manfred Metcalf who lived in the area of Fort Benning, and he was getting some stones for a barbecue. He came across a stone that looked rather peculiar to him. He took the stone to a man named Joseph Mahan, who was a director of the Columbus, Georgia Museum of Arts and Crafts Department of Research. Because once again, Columbus, Georgia would be the next primary city, that's next to Fort Benning. So this is where he took it. So the Metcalf stone is connecting the indigenous people of Georgia to the Minoan civilization 3,500 years ago. All right. 3,500 years ago. But once again, this is the geographic region we're dealing with right here. So I'm going to reread this one more time. Then we're going to look at some pictures of the Minoan people. It says Mahan studied markings on the stone. In 1968, Mahan sent a cast of the Metcalf stone to Professor Cyrus Gordon at Brandeis University. Gordon matched the markings on the stone against characters used by the Minoans, whose capital in the Bronze Age 3,500 years ago was Knossos on the island of Crete. So that means this Metcalf stone they found in Fort Benning, Georgia, when they researched, the writing on it dated back to the Minoans because it was characters that the Minoans were using during the Bronze Age. So this stone that they found now in Fort Benning, Georgia, had writing on it that dated back 3,500 years ago to the Bronze Age, and the manuscript writing was used by the Minoans. Okay, now I want you to just think in mind about the Minoans and how they gonna look and how the indigenous Americans look. Once again, a copper-colored people. Joseph Mahan of the Georgia Museum was a specialist in American Indian archaeology and ethnology. He had been especially studying the Yuki Indian or Yuki tribe when the Metcalf stone came into his hand. Mahan believed the Yuki Indians were racially and linguistically different from other Indians. Yuki legends told how they came to western Georgia from the south and had originally reached America from the east. All right. So that's the Yuki Indians and their connection to, once again, the Minoans. Now we're going to look at some pictures of the Minoans. So we have our first picture right here of the Minoans in front of us. Once again, the people who created the civilization in the Mediterranean known as, the Crete or the Minoan civilization. And also the people behind the Metcalf stone that was found in Fort Benning, Georgia. And also the Aboriginal family or mother and father tribe to the Yuki Aboriginal Indian. Okay. And other indigenous tribes of Georgia and Alabama. So this is how the Minoans look, a copper-colored people. Okay. Once again, the same way that Blackbeard looks and the same way that other indigenous Americans look. This is the Minoans right here. So they say that the Minoans have a ethnic and a linguistic connection to basically indigenous Indians of Georgia. All right. Once again, this is them right here. Here's another picture of a Minoan. Here's another picture of a Minoan. Once again, copper colored skin, dealing with the fish. Once again, our people are mariners, always dealing with the water. Copper colored skin, American 1828, the copper colored races here upon the arrival of the European. Here's another picture of a Minoan. Here go two of them. Once again, copper colored people. Copper colored people. So the people that they found in Georgia look like this.